Number 1, Terry Lynn Nichols. Let's look at a quiet kind of evil that hides in plain sight. He blended into small-town life, smiling at neighbors while believing chaos was the only way to fix the world. Terry Lynn Nichols seemed like an ordinary man, yet he helped orchestrate one of the deadliest crimes on American soil. Born in Michigan in 1955, Nichols was the second of 4 children raised in a working-class home. Neighbors and friends remember him as shy, polite, and remarkably soft-spoken. But beneath that surface lay a deep distrust of authority and a fixation on survivalist ideas. These traits eventually led him toward darkness. After drifting through odd jobs, he enlisted in the United States Army. That was where he met another soldier named Timothy McVeigh. McVeigh carried a rage against the government that would soon consume Nichols' entire life. They bonded over shared frustrations. They hated federal authority and gun control, fueled by anger over the 1993 siege in Waco. Battling a failed marriage and debt, Nichols became obsessed with the thought that the American government had become a tyrant. McVeigh gave that anger a target. Together, they decided to stop using words and start using high explosives. By 1994, Nichols was helping McVeigh gather the components needed for a massive bomb. They stockpiled fertilizer and ammonium nitrate, mixing the dangerous chemicals with ordinary fuel oil. These common farming materials were being transformed into a lethal weapon of war. Nichols used fake names to rent storage units, buying detonators and keeping detailed logs of their progress. To anyone watching, it looked like farm work. In reality, they were building a massive homemade bomb. On April 19, 1995, McVeigh parked a rented Ryder truck outside the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. Inside was a 4,800-pound bomb that he and Nichols had spent months carefully assembling. At 9:02 a.m., the device exploded with world-shaking force. Half the building collapsed instantly. Cars burned for blocks as a massive plume of smoke choked the sky. The blast killed 168 people, including 19 children in a daycare center, and injured hundreds more. It remains the most lethal act of domestic terrorism in United States history. Nichols was in Kansas that morning, but his fingerprints were all over every detail of the operation. He provided the chemicals, the timers, the storage, and the tools. After tracing rental records, the FBI found his name. Within 2 days, agents were at his door in Kansas. Nichols surrendered without a fight, claiming he had no idea what McVeigh was actually planning to do. But investigators found the evidence in his garage: bomb components, maps, and letters proving he was a co-conspirator. You and I can see how this grew into one of the largest investigations in American history. Thousands of agents and forensic experts sifted through the ruins, searching for any piece of the puzzle. They found twisted metal and chemical traces that led straight back to Nichols and his partner. McVeigh himself would later call Nichols his co-pilot, the man who made the attack possible. Public horror turned into pure rage once people realized Nichols helped store materials that killed dozens of children. The evidence was undeniable. This was not a misunderstanding or a simple mistake. He had helped wage war on his own nation. His first trial began in 1997. He was convicted of conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction and 8 other counts. These included the involuntary manslaughter of the federal officers who died in the explosion. A judge sentenced him to life without parole, but the state of Oklahoma wasn't finished. In 2004, they charged him with 161 counts of first-degree murder for the civilians. During the 4-month trial, jurors heard exactly how the pair built and tested the bomb before they were finally caught. Throughout the entire proceeding, Nichols sat perfectly still and emotionless. The jury could not agree on a death sentence for the crimes. Instead, the judge issued 161 consecutive life terms, ensuring Nichols would die behind bars. He was moved to the Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, the highest security facility. It is a place for the most dangerous men on earth. Today, Nichols lives out his days in total silence. His cell measures just 7 feet wide by 12 feet long, far from the marathon's symbol of endurance, joy, and community. Thousands once lined the streets to cheer runners at the Boylston Street finish line. Inside that crowd, the Zarnav brothers placed 2 pressure cooker bombs packed with shrapnel and hidden inside backpacks. The pair casually walked away, blending into the noise and color of the race. At 2:49 p.m., the first explosion ripped through the crowd. 12 seconds later, the second bomb detonated. Instantly, celebration turned to panic. 3 people died on the spot, and over 260 were wounded, many losing limbs. Chaos consumed downtown Boston. Smoke, screams, and sirens filled the air as medics struggled to process the nightmare unfolding on the streets. Video and witnesses pointed to 2 young men with backpacks. When the FBI released their photos, the brothers panicked. That night, they murdered an MIT officer, stole a car, and led police on a violent chase through the suburbs. The confrontation ended in a gunfight. Tamerlan was killed in the exchange, while Dzhokhar fled on foot, bleeding and hiding in a backyard, curled up inside a boat. The following evening, after a 24-hour citywide lockdown, thermal cameras finally spotted him under the boat's tarp. Police surrounded the property, and after a tense standoff, Tsarnaev was taken alive. On his body, investigators found traces of explosive residue. Inside the boat, they found a handwritten note justifying the attacks as revenge for foreign death, clear proof of his radical intent. The full investigation revealed the truth. Homemade bombs built in their apartment, extremist videos, and months of cold, calculated preparation. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev faced 30 federal charges, including the use of a weapon of mass destruction and the killing of an officer. His trial opened in early 2015 in a Boston courtroom packed with victims, survivors, and international media. Prosecutors described a young man who chose dark ideology over humanity, following his older brother into ruin. His defense team argued he was manipulated by Tamerlan, a confused teen swept up in his brother's fanatical world. But the evidence was overwhelming. Photos of him with the bomb, heart-wrenching survivor testimony, and video of his calm departure. After 2 months of testimony and a single day of deliberation, the jury convicted him on all 30 counts. In May 2015, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. When allowed to speak, he offered a brief, quiet apology, but for many it felt hollow. The pain was too great, and the damage forever done. Tsarnaev's case spent years in appeals. In 2020, a federal court overturned his death sentence over jury selection issues. However, in 2022, the Supreme Court reinstated it, affirming the original punishment. For now, he remains at ADX Florence, held under special administrative measures that ensure near total isolation. His mail is screened and outside contact is almost zero. Inside the Supermax, Dzhokhar spends 23 hours a day alone in a cell. A stark contrast to the open streets where he once walked freely. He eats and prays alone. Reports call him quiet and compliant, yet he remains under constant observation. Still in his early 30s, he will likely spend decades trapped behind those walls, even if his death sentence is eventually carried out. To many Americans, Tsarnaev represents a terrifying modern reality. How a teenager raised in freedom can be radicalized at home and turn that freedom into violence. His life in the nation's most secure prison ensures he will never see the outside world again, and that his name is forever linked to the tragedy he helped create. Number 3, Larry Hoover. Power can outlive the streets. In the underworld of American crime, few names carry the weight of Larry Hoover, a man who turned a neighborhood gang into a massive criminal empire from prison. Today, he sits in the isolation of ADX Florence, the Supermax built for men whose words alone can still move armies. Today, you and I are going to trace the life of Larry Hoover, born in Jackson, Mississippi in 1950. He grew up around constant poverty, violence, and very few opportunities. By age 13, Hoover had already joined a local street gang. To the other kids, he wasn't just another teenager. He was sharp and calculating, a boy who understood how power worked, even on the smallest scale. That cold instinct would go on to define his entire life. During the late 1960s, Hoover and his crew started a gang that became the Gangster Disciples, one of the most feared criminal networks in America. What started as a small crew grew fast through sheer discipline and brutal violence. Hoover enforced a strict code respect, order, and profit, and he demanded absolute loyalty from everyone. The group expanded quickly, fueled by Chicago's massive drug trade and various extortion rackets. By the early 1970s, Hoover's word was basically the law in certain parts of the city. But in 1973, his growing empire faced its first major collapse. Hoover was convicted of ordering the murder of William Young, a fellow gang member who was accused of stealing from the group. The hit earned him a sentence of 150 to 200 years. Many assumed his influence was over. They were wrong. From behind prison walls, Hoover started to reinvent himself. In the 1980s, he rebranded his gang as a social organization using the slogan growth and development. On paper, it looked like reform and helpful community program. There were anti-violence messages and civic events, but investigators soon discovered Hoover was still running a sophisticated criminal empire from his cell. His secret orders, sent through coded messages, directed massive drug trafficking and extortion operations across more than 30 different states. He had become a rare kind of inmate, someone who could control the streets from a prison cell. Let's look closer at 1995, when the FBI and DEA launched Operation Headache to target his network. Undercover agents and wiretaps captured hours of coded talk, linking him directly to the gang's illegal operation. 2 years later, Hoover and his top lieutenants were indicted on federal conspiracy and racketeering charges for drug trafficking and running a continuing criminal enterprise. In 1997, after a long trial, Hoover was convicted and given 6 life sentences. The court's message was loud and clear. His power would never extend beyond those prison walls again. After sentencing, he was sent to ADX Florence, the most secure prison in America. It wasn't symbolic, it was strategic. Authorities realized that ordinary prisons had completely failed to contain his influence. At ADX, communication is nearly impossible. Inmates live in concrete cells and spend their days in total isolation. Even his phone calls and mail are now strictly restricted. Inside ADX, Hoover's power was finally severed. He spends 23 hours a day in a cell with only brief moments in the concrete pit. Even the few communications he's allowed are closely monitored by federal agents. Reports suggest that despite the passing decades, Hoover remains incredibly composed and controlled behind bars. The man who once commanded tens of thousands is now reduced to absolute silence. Yet his legacy lives on. The gangster disciples still exist, fragmented but still very powerful. Their members are spread across the Midwest and South. Some still call him King Larry, a title whispered rather than spoken. For the police, Hoover's story is a warning about how criminal power can adapt and survive even behind bars. For the public, it's a chilling reminder that leadership, even within the criminal underworld, is about more than presence. It is all about influence. In 2021, a surprising cultural moment pushed Hoover's name back into the national headlines. Rappers Kanye West and Drake held a huge concert in Los Angeles, demanding his release and arguing he'd reform. The movement sparked a heated debate. Could a man who built a violent empire ever truly change? The government's answer was immediate and final. Larry Hoover is going to die in prison. Now in his 70s, he remains at ADX Florence, serving 6 life sentences in permanent isolation. Time has stripped away his reach and his streets, but for us, the myth of Larry Hoover still lingers. This is the story of a man who ruled a criminal nation from a cell, with an ambition that outlasted his freedom. Number 4, Richard Reed. It only takes one moment at 30,000 feet to change the way we fly forever. On December 22nd, 2001, a quiet man boarded an American Airlines flight from Paris to Miami. He looked exhausted, ordinary, and completely unremarkable. But hidden inside his shoes were enough explosives to kill nearly 200 people and destroy the plane midair. His name was Richard Reed, and that failed terror attack would earn him a permanent cell in ADX Florence. Reed was born in South London in 1970. His childhood was a mess, defined by poverty, school expulsions, and petty crime. His parents couldn't control his behavior, and Reed spent most of his youth in juvenile detention centers. Behind bars, he searched for identity and a real purpose, something the outside world never gave him. In his 20s, that search led him to Islam. At first, It offered him some stability, but as time passed, Reed fell under the influence of radical clerics who twisted his faith into violent extremism. By the late 1990s, Reed had joined radical circles in London, attending mosques known for aggressive anti-Western sermons. These meetings linked him to Al-Qaeda networks across Europe. In 2001, he traveled to Afghanistan to train in explosives and suicide operations. He returned to Europe a different man, withdrawn, silent, and totally committed to jihad. To neighbors, he seemed distant but harmless. In reality, he was plotting a mass murder. On that freezing December morning, Reed checked in for American Airlines Flight 63, carrying 197 people. Inside the soles of his bulky black shoes were plastic explosives wired to a detonator. Somewhere over the Atlantic, he planned to strike a match and blow the aircraft out of the sky. For hours, everything seemed fine. Reed kept to himself, flipping through a magazine and shifting his feet. But as they entered American airspace, passengers smelled smoke, a thin, bitter scent rising from his seat. A flight attendant saw him fumbling with his shoes and moved in for a closer look. When she screamed, Reed attacked. Chaos broke out as the crew and passengers fought to pin him down. A group of men bound him with seatbelt extensions and headphone wires, while others dumped water on his smoking sneakers to kill the chemical reaction. The captain raced to Boston, where federal agents stormed the plane and dragged Reed into custody. Inside his shoes, investigators found petanine, a powerful explosive that would have shredded the plane if he had succeeded. In the shadow of 9/11, the world was already terrified, and this near miss hit hard. Experts realized just how close they had come to losing another flight. In response, airports across the globe enforced a new rule. Every passenger must now remove their shoes at security, a direct result of Richard Reed's failed shoe bomb. Reed faced 8 federal counts, including attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction and attempted murder. His 2003 trial was fast and very public. When asked for his plea, Reed simply said, "I am guilty." He told the courtroom his actions were part of a war against the United States. Even his own defense lawyers were stunned by his complete lack of remorse. At sentencing, the judge blasted him, calling his actions a cowardly and horrific attempt to slaughter innocent civilians. The court handed down the maximum penalty, 3 consecutive life sentences plus 110 years without parole. Reed was ordered to pay back the passengers and crew he tried to kill, though he didn't have a cent. Shortly after, Reed was sent to ADX Florence, the supermax prison in Colorado built for America's worst criminals. There, his life became a cycle of total isolation. He spends 23 hours a day in a concrete room, eating meals through a small slot in the metal door. Even in the supermax, officials keep him under special restrictions, limiting his mail and phone calls. They believe his loyalty to Al-Qaeda is still as strong as ever. Reed, now in his 50s, has never shown a shred of regret. In letters caught by guards, he writes that he still sees himself as a soldier in a holy war. Authorities still view him as a danger, not for his actions, but because his words might inspire others. It is a bitter irony. His bomb failed, yet his name became infamous by forcing a global shift in security. Deep inside the walls of ADX Florence, the notorious shoe bomber now lives in complete silence. He no longer walks among us or poses a threat to travelers flying miles above the earth. His cell, barely larger than a bathroom, is all he has left. For the families, his capture brought justice. For the rest of the world, it was a dark reminder that our vigilance must never end. One failed mission changed every traveler's life forever. Number 5, Eric Rudolph. Sometimes, terror hides behind the face of an ordinary rebel. He walked among the public, blending into crowds only to disappear into the woods after leaving destruction behind. For many years, Eric Rudolph was one of the most wanted men in all of America. His bombings in the 1990s, including the Atlanta Olympics attack, left a trail of death and terror. After his capture, the nation realized its most elusive terrorist had been surviving off the land, fueled by hatred. Eric Robert Rudolph was born in Florida in 1966 and raised in the mountains of North Carolina. His family lived simply, raising him with survivalist ideals and a deep mistrust of the government. As a teenager, he was bright but incredibly restless. He briefly joined the U.S. Army for explosives training, but his military career was very short-lived. After the service, he drifted into extremist groups, pulled toward radical anti-government and white supremacist beliefs. By the mid-1990s, Rudolph was convinced that violence was the only way to make the world listen. The stage for his most infamous crime was set in the summer of 1996 at the Olympics. On the night of July 27th, Centennial Olympic Park was packed with people enjoying the music and festivity. Rudolph slipped into the crowd carrying a green backpack loaded with pipe bombs and sharp nails. He dropped the bag near a sound tower and walked away. At 1:20 a.m., it exploded. The blast killed a woman, injured more than 100 people, and turned a symbol of peace into chaos. That single attack shocked the entire nation. The FBI launched a massive investigation, but Rudolph had already disappeared into the Appalachian wilderness. While the search intensified, new bombings surfaced, each one carrying his unique criminal signature. In 1997, he attacked 2 health clinics and a nightclub in Atlanta, wounding several innocent people. In 1998, another device exploded in Birmingham, killing a policeman and critically injuring a nurse. Every attack was driven by his extremist opposition to abortion and the rights of the LGBTQ community. His writings later revealed he saw himself as a soldier in a war against what he called moral decay. By 1998, he was on the FBI 10 Most Wanted list with a $1 million bounty. Despite the massive manhunt, he vanished completely, surviving 5 years in the mountains on stolen food and pure grit. Locals occasionally spotted him digging through dumpsters or slipping through the hidden backwood trails, but he always managed to vanish before the authorities could close in on him. His capture finally happened in May 2003. A rookie officer in North Carolina caught him rummaging behind a grocery store in the dark morning hours. Thin, bearded, and silent, Rudolph surrendered to the officer without any further struggle. After a years-long hunt, the FBI finally had their killer. In court, he showed absolutely no remorse. He claimed the bombings were defensive acts. To dodge the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to every charge. He confessed to the Olympic bombing and helped investigators find the rest of his hidden explosives. In 2005, he was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 120 years in prison. Shortly after his sentencing, Rudolph was moved to ADX Florence, where he still remains today. His isolation is absolute. 23 hours a day, he is locked inside a tiny concrete cell. His contact with the outside is limited to the odd monitored letter or brief exercise in a walled courtyard. In that silence, the man who dreamed of changing the world now mutters to himself. Even behind bars, Rudolph still tries to justify his crimes. He fills pages with angry essays attacking the government and preaching his ideology. Officials cut his lines to the outside, terrified his words might spark more violence. He stays calm and solitary, never once showing regret. To him, that campaign of terror was a righteous crusade. For survivors and agents, this case remains one of the most chilling examples of domestic terror in American history. Rudolph didn't target soldiers or politicians. He went after innocent, ordinary people. People just working, celebrating, or going about their days. His capture finally closed a decade-long chapter of fear, yet the scars never truly faded. Now in his late 50s, Eric Rudolph remains entombed in America's most secure prison. From his window, he can see the mountains he once hid in, but they are forever out of reach. The man who thought he could survive forever off the grid is now trapped in the smallest grid possible, a concrete box designed to make sure he never walks free again. Number 6, Zacarias Moussaoui. You and I both know there are moments when one right question could change everything. In August 2001, an FBI agent watched a bizarre flight student in Minnesota. Confused why a man with no interest in taking off or landing wanted to steer a Boeing 747. That student was Zacarias Moussaoui, the man history would soon remember as the 21st hijacker. He was arrested weeks before September 11th, but his silence allowed the worst terror attack in U.S. history to proceed exactly as planned. Zacarias Moussaoui was born in France back in 1968 to parents from Morocco. His family worked themselves to the bone, but life stayed tough. Moussaoui was a bright student, earning an international business degree before moving his studies to London. He was smart, well-spoken, and driven, but he was also restless. In Britain, he fell under the spell of radical preachers who blamed the West for everything. What started as curiosity soon hardened into dangerous extremism. By the late 1990s, Moussaoui had made his way to Afghanistan. There, he trained in Al-Qaeda camps under the very men who would later plan the September 11th attacks. He came back to Europe a different person, cold, detached, and absolutely convinced that jihad was his soul's purpose. In early 2001, he entered America on a student visa and started flight training at several different schools. He acted strange from the start, paying thousands in cash and showing zero interest in learning the most basic flight skills. At a school in Eagan, Minnesota, flight instructors got worried when he only wanted to steer massive jets, completely ignoring how to take off or land. Their call to the FBI might have stopped an even more devastating disaster from unfolding. On August 16, 2001, feds arrested Moussaoui on immigration charges thanks to the school's tip. They grabbed his laptop and gear, but red tape prevented them from searching his files right then and there. That computer held the names and evidence linking him directly to several of the men who would carry out 9/11. Let's look at this together. When those planes hit, agents realized the man in their cell was part of the plot. After the attacks, Moussaoui faced endless interrogation. He stayed silent, often mocking and taunting the investigators who questioned him. Evidence proved he trained with the Hamburg cell, including Mohammed Atta, and was tied to the notorious shoe bomber Richard Reed. Intelligence experts eventually concluded that he was supposed to be part of a fifth plane crew with their sights set on the White House. By December 2001, he faced 6 federal conspiracy charges for his part in the 9/11 plot. His trial was about to become one of the most explosive and dramatic in U.S. history. Representing himself, Moussaoui constantly disrupted the court, screaming his support for Al-Qaeda. He swung wildly between pure delusion and cold arrogance. At one point, he boasted to the court that he was Al-Qaeda and knew Osama bin Laden personally. Even with his wild outbursts, the prosecution had built an airtight case against him. They laid out proof of his terror training and his secret messages to other operatives, and revealed exactly what he knew about using passenger jets as guided missiles. Victims' families sat in the gallery, forced to watch, as a man linked to such horror mocked their immense grief. In April 2005, Moussaoui finally pleaded guilty to every count, admitting he was part of the deadly conspiracy. During sentencing, prosecutors fought for the death penalty, while the defense argued he was mentally unstable and not directly responsible for the attacks. After weeks of testimony and chilling stories from the survivors, the jury spared him. On May 4, 2006, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He was transferred to ADX Florence, where he remains in total isolation. His reinforced concrete cell holds only a bed, sink, and steel toilet. For 23 hours a day, Moussaoui sits alone, monitored constantly. Under special rules, he is forbidden from communicating freely, receiving unfiltered mail, or interacting with other prisoners. Authorities still see him as a threat whose words could spark new violence. Now in his late 50s, years of solitary haven't softened his radical views. He has filed strange lawsuits claiming mistreatment, accusing guards of poisoning him, and sending bizarre letters to the courts. He still voices extremist beliefs, occasionally claiming that the United States deserved those horrific attacks. Despite his defiance, his world is now a silent, echoing cell deep inside the Supermax. Today, his name symbolizes a haunting what if. We have to wonder, if the FBI had opened his laptop just a few weeks sooner, could the plot have been stopped? Could thousands of lives have been saved? Those questions remain unanswered while he lives out his remaining days in dark isolation. Inside ADX Florence, Zacarias Moussaoui remains the last living link to the 9/11 plot, a dark reminder of how close the world came to tragedy. Number 7, Ramzi Youssef. Long before 9/11, another man tried to bring down the World Trade Center years earlier. His name was Ramzi Youssef. a cold, calculating bomb maker who wanted to kill thousands and shake America to its core. In 1993, his plan failed, but it almost changed history forever. Today, he sits in isolation. Let's look at the architects of terror whose crimes still echo across the decades. Ramzi Ahmed Youssef was born in Kuwait in 1967 to Pakistani parents. He grew up in a privileged family, well-educated and fluent in several languages. From a young age, he displayed a sharp intellect and a fascination with engineering. He later studied electrical engineering in Wales, skills that would one day make his explosives much more deadly. But behind that academic drive, a darker curiosity grew. During the late 80s, as the Soviet-Afghan War caught the world's eye, Youssef's resentment toward Western influence in the Middle East started to harden. By his mid-20s, he had embraced radical views and set out to challenge what he saw as America's global dominance. In 1992, Youssef entered the United States with a fake passport, slipping past security without notice. He acted fast. Teaming up with radicals in New Jersey, he began planning a massive attack intended to teach the United States a lesson they would never forget. The target was the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York. His goal was more than just destruction. He wanted to topple one tower into the other, killing tens of thousands at once. On February 26, 1993, Youssef drove a rented van into the underground parking garage beneath the North Tower. Inside was a 1,200-pound bomb made of urea nitrate, hydrogen gas, and other chemicals. A crude but powerful device he had designed himself. After lighting the fuse, Youssef calmly left the building. At 12:17 p.m., the massive bomb exploded. The blast ripped through 5 concrete floors, carving a crater and sending fire up through the elevator shafts. Smoke filled the stairwells as thousands tried to escape the darkened building. The explosion killed 6 people and injured over 1,000 others. Yet his plan to topple the towers failed. Structural engineers later said if the bomb had been closer to a pillar, the damage would have been catastrophic. Still, the attack proved that America was no longer untouchable. For investigators, it was the first sign that a new type of terrorism had arrived. Within hours, FBI agents began piecing together the evidence, finding fragments of the van used in the blast. Investigators found a chassis fragment with a vehicle identification number. That pointed right to a New Jersey rental shop and one of Youssef's partners. He actually came back days later just to claim his deposit. By that time, Youssef had already fled, catching a flight to Pakistan under a fake name. For the next 2 years, he was one of the planet's most wanted men. He kept planning attacks, like the Bojinka plot, which targeted 12 American passenger planes flying over the Pacific Ocean. It could have ended thousands of lives, but in 1995, a chemical fire in his Manila apartment exposed everything to the world. When police raided the flat, they found laptop files mapping out the whole plan, from airline schedules to bomb design. Just days later, Youssef was tracked to a luxury Islamabad hotel. A team of elite agents and local authorities stormed his room. Reports say Youssef was just sitting there on the floor. He was surrounded by wires and bomb-making manuals. He smiled during his arrest, saying, "I am glad it is finally over." In 1998, after a massive New York trial, Youssef was convicted of masterminding the '93 Trade Center attack and the Bojinka plot. He stayed completely unrepentant during sentencing. He declared his goal was to punish America for what it was doing in the Middle East. The judge handed down the harshest sentence, life plus 240 years, recommending he spend the rest of his life in total isolation. They sent Youssef to ADX Florence, where he has remained to this day. He is kept under strict measures, meaning every bit of his communication is monitored, except for his lawyers. He is in his cell 23 hours a day, where the only sound is distant doors locking. Guards say he rarely speaks, shows zero remorse, and follows the exact same routine every single day. Now, in his late 50s, he remains one of the most heavily guarded prisoners in the United States. He is a living precursor to 9/11, the man whose first strike proved the World Trade Center was actually a vulnerable target. In a dark twist, his own uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed would later mastermind the 9/11 attacks. Now Youssef's world is just bare walls and a window looking out at the Colorado desert. The man who dreamed of bringing America to its knees now lives in silence, forgotten by the world he tried to break. Number 8. Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib. Christmas morning, 2009. While families opened gifts, a jet from Amsterdam was descending toward Detroit with 289 souls on board. Sitting among them was a 23-year-old man, face blank, whispering quiet prayers to himself. Sewn into his underwear was a small but deadly explosive, hidden deep beneath his clothes. He was about to change airport security for every traveler forever. His name was Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib. The bomb failed, but his intent was lethal. This man was not born into poverty or desperation. He grew up in Nigerian privilege. His father was a highly respected banker, and his family lived a life of absolute luxury. He went to international schools. He excelled in school and studied mechanical engineering at University College London. Friends called him quiet, polite, and religious, but never saw him as a threat. But beneath that calm, he felt lost. While abroad, he grew isolated, and his interest in extremist ideas began to fester in online forums. That curiosity was soon exploited by one of the most dangerous terror groups on the planet. By 2009, he had traveled to Yemen. There, he met operatives from Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, a group known for recruiting Western-educated Muslims. They saw his potential. He was smart, spoke perfect English, and was willing to die. He spent weeks training, learning to handle explosives, and build a device that could slip past airport security. The mission was simple: board a flight to America and detonate the device, killing everyone on board. On December 25, 2009, he boarded Northwest Airlines Flight 253 from Amsterdam to Detroit. Carrying only a small bag, he smiled at the crew and found his window seat at the back. Under his clothes was a packet of PETN, a deadly explosive hooked to a syringe detonator. Most of the flight he seemed calm, reading and praying, just blending in with everyone else. As the plane descended toward Detroit, the young man pulled a blanket over his lap and prepared to strike his detonator. A sudden flash filled the cabin, followed by smoke and the acrid stench of burning fabric. The device had failed, setting his own clothes ablaze. Panic erupted as passengers screamed. One man lunged across the aisle to tackle Abdul Muttalib, while crew members rushed in with fire extinguishers. They pinned the attacker down while the pilots brought the plane in for an emergency landing. The moment the wheels stopped, federal agents stormed the aircraft. Inside, they found a blackened device fused to his underwear and chemical residue across his skin. Under interrogation, Abdul Muttalib calmly admitted he was trained by Al-Qaeda in Yemen and acted on their orders. He claimed he wanted revenge for American military actions. This confession forced a massive global overhaul of airport security. New full-body scanners and aggressive pat-downs were soon rolled out at airports across the globe. In 2010, a grand jury indicted him on 8 counts, including the attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction. Before the trial began, he fired his legal team, choosing instead to represent himself in court. In front of the judge, he boasted about being a soldier of Allah, a statement that chilled everyone in the room. He ignored the victims, refused to apologize, and even smiled as prosecutors recounted the terror he caused. In 2012, the judge handed down 4 consecutive life sentences plus an additional 50 years. The judge branded him a remorseless terrorist. He was sent to ADX Florence, where he now lives in total isolation. Inside that Supermax facility, he remains one of the youngest men behind bars. Guards consider him a major threat, not just for his past actions, but for his radical ideology. Even in prison, he has tried to spread his message, shouting through vents to share radical sermons with other inmates. Because of this, officials placed him under strict, special administrative measures. He is cut off from the world to stop him from inspiring others. He eats, prays, and lives entirely within a tiny concrete cell. As the years have passed, Abdul Muttalib has filed several lawsuits over his treatment, but all failed. Now in his mid-30s, he stays silent and unrepentant. To investigators, he represents a terrifying new breed of terrorist. He was well educated and radicalized online rather than on a battlefield. His failure exposed a massive hole in global defense. Every traveler who takes off their shoes today is reacting to the shadows of men like Richard Reed and Abdul Muttalib. Their failed plots became the foundation of modern flight security. Their harsh sentences serve as a grim warning to anyone thinking of following in their footsteps. Today, deep inside the walls of ADX Florence, the man known as the Underwear Bomber sits in a quiet world of gray stone and a single window facing the desert. In trying to end the lives of others, he only destroyed his own. Next, we look at Abu Hamza al-Masri. For some, a voice is the only weapon they need to cause chaos. For over 10 years, Abu Hamza used his London pulpit to spread hate and call for war against the West. His radical speeches helped mold a new generation of extremists who carried out attacks across the globe. But now those words reach no one. The preacher who once led crowds now speaks only to the silence of his cell. His birth name was Mustafa Kemal Mustafa. He was born in 1958 in Alexandria, Egypt, during a period of heavy political unrest. He eventually moved to London to study engineering, and by most accounts, he was a bright and driven student. But as the years went by, something shifted. He became obsessed with religion, moving from faith to dangerous fanaticism. By the early 90s, he was deep within radical circles, convinced that violence was a holy necessity. A strange accident in Afghanistan during that same period left Abu Hamza permanently scarred. He lost both of his hands and an eye, allegedly while he was testing homemade explosives. Afterward, he began using metal hooks to replace his hands, earning him the nickname the Hook-Handed Cleric. Yet those physical injuries only seemed to harden his resolve. Returning to London, he took over the Finsbury Park Mosque and turned it into a factory for radical ideas. From that pulpit, he delivered sermons that were part religious teaching and part open declaration of war. He championed Al-Qaeda, defended killing civilians, and urged young recruits to seek militant training abroad. Under his dark influence, many British citizens left to join terror cells. His local mosque transformed into an extremist hub. It hosted men later tied to attacks across America and Europe. For years, the United Kingdom struggled to silence his dangerous rhetoric. Using free speech laws as a shield, Abu Hamza exploited democracy to spread hate. But his actions eventually turned bloody. Investigators linked him to a 1998 kidnapping in Yemen, an ordeal that left 4 innocent tourists dead. He was even accused of attempting to establish a secret training camp in Oregon while supporting the Taliban and Al-Qaeda behind the scenes. In 2004, London police finally arrested him for inciting murder and racial hatred. He was sentenced to 7 years. But while he was behind bars, the United States launched a legal battle to extradite him. They wanted him for terrorism offenses that targeted and killed American citizens. After a long legal war, the British courts relented. In 2012, Abu Hamza was put on a plane and flown to New York. His 2014 trial was sensational. Jurors watched videos of him in London waving his metal hooks while screaming for a global holy war. They heard recordings of him negotiating for hostages and planning various training operations. The evidence was damning. He was found guilty on 11 federal charges, from taking hostages to plotting a militant base right on American soil. When given a chance to speak before sentencing, he stayed defiant. He argued his words were misunderstood spiritual guidance. The judge, however, saw through his hollow excuses. Handed a life sentence without parole, he was sent to ADX Florence, the world's most secure prison. Life inside the mountain is a harsh contrast to his days of power. For 23 hours a day, he sits alone in a tiny concrete cell. He eats through a slot and exercises inside a high-walled enclosure. Every communication is recorded and heavily monitored. Despite modifications for his physical disabilities, his pleas for human contact are ignored. The system has decided he is far too dangerous to talk. The court ruled his strict isolation was earned by the scale of his crimes. Now in his mid-60s, his health is failing. That once powerful, booming voice has finally faded. To officials, he remains a symbol of radical danger, a living proof that words can truly kill. His life at ADX is not just a prison sentence. It is a safeguard. It ensures his hateful rhetoric can never incite violence again. Abu Hamza al-Masri's journey ended in total silence. He once believed he was a divine messenger, but now he is just a number in a cold cell. He remains a cautionary tale. It is proof that even the loudest voice of hate can be silenced by America's most secure prison walls. Number 10, Robert Hanssen. We'll see that betrayal rarely wears a mask. Sometimes it wears a suit and badge, smiling at those it deceives. For 20 years, Robert Hanssen lived a double life as a master spy. By day, a trusted FBI agent. By night, one of the most damaging traitors in history. His secrets led to the execution of American informants overseas. He exposed classified operations and nearly crippled United States intelligence during the height of the Cold War. When he was caught in 2001, his own colleagues were stunned that the man beside them had sold them out. Robert Philip Hanssen was born in Chicago in 1944, raised by a strict police officer. His childhood was defined by a father who ruled with criticism. Those early years shaped his cold and distant personality. After studying accounting, Hanssen joined the Chicago police before moving to the FB1 in 1976. He was placed in counterintelligence, the unit specifically designed to catch spies. To his peers, he was brilliant but awkward, a quiet man with a strange air of superiority. But beneath that boring surface, he carried a lethal secret. In 1979, just 3 years in, Hanssen began selling secrets to the Soviet Union. At first, it seemed like he was just doing it for the money. That first drop netted him $20,000. Soon, though, cold greed bled into pure ego. This wasn't just about the money. He wanted power. Using dead drops and coded letters hidden in local parks, Hanssen handed over more than 6,000 highly classified documents, leaking nuclear defense plans, surveillance tech, and the names of undercover agents stationed all around the world. Those leaks were fatal. Several informants were executed. To stay hidden, Hanssen used the alias Ramon Garcia. He never actually met his handlers in person, opting for messages stashed in trash bags and taped underneath park benches. Chalk marks on neighborhood fences signaled his Soviet contacts. Over time, he pocketed more than $1.4 million in cash, diamonds, and secret offshore funds. Back at the FBI office, colleagues saw a quiet professional. He was exactly the kind of man no one would ever suspect. Even after the Soviet Union fell, he didn't stop. He simply started selling secrets to the new Russian Federation. His intel compromised active operations, letting foreign spies track American agents with chilling, surgical precision. His betrayal was a total catastrophe for national security. By the 1990s, suspicions within the FBI and CIA reached a breaking point as they hunted for a mole. The losses were staggering, but the traitor's identity remained a total mystery. In a twisted irony, Hanssen was assigned to find the mole, essentially investigating himself to stay one step ahead. It was a perfect shield, but by 2000, the walls were finally closing in. A tip from a Russian officer led to a recording and a fingerprint left at a drop site. The evidence pointed directly to him. On February 18, 2001, agents prepared a trap at a park in Virginia. Teams watched as Hanssen placed a bag of stolen secrets under a bridge, a final gift for his Russian handler. As he turned to leave, federal agents closed in. His first words were quiet, almost a whisper. "What took you so long?" The sheer scale of his betrayal stunned the nation. In July 2001, Hanssen pleaded guilty to 15 counts of espionage to avoid execution. He confessed to selling out his country for over 20 years. He admitted to sabotaging operations and putting lives at risk. The court handed down 15 life sentences, calling it the worst intelligence disaster in the country's history. Hanssen was sent to ADX Florence, a supermax prison built for total isolation. Life there was a gray, endless routine. He spent his days in a tiny cell, reading and writing letters in near total silence. Other inmates saw a man who was quiet and cold, someone who had simply accepted his fate. For 2 decades, he sat in that silence, severed from the world he once helped dismantle. He wasn't a violent man, but he was incredibly dangerous. The damage he caused forced the United States to completely rewrite its intelligence playbooks and security procedures. His shadow changed how America protects its secrets and monitors its own people. Within those prison walls, he was a living warning. The greatest danger often hides in plain sight. In June 2023, guards found Robert Hanssen unresponsive in his concrete cell. He died at 79 years old, closing one of the FBI's darkest chapters. There was no funeral and no recognition, only a final, cold silence. He left behind only a stained legacy in the history of espionage. Hanssen was nothing like the violent terrorists in the cells nearby. His weapon of choice wasn't a gun or a bomb. His weapon was information, and it cut deeper than any bullet ever could. Today, his name sits beside Benedict Arnold as one of the most infamous traitors in the history of America.